I grew up in Afghanistan during the Russian occupation, and as a child, I remember my father being gone a lot. And the subject of my father's whereabouts was somewhat taboo in our household because my mother told us we were never to ask about him, so we never did. And yeah, sometimes I wondered if he cared about me. And growing up during the war was difficult because there were bomb strikes or missile attacks on a daily basis. In fact, there is this distinct whistling noise that a missile makes right before it's about to hit its target. And sometimes they'd be so close that you could hear that. And my parents, they were pretty desperate to leave the country, but they couldn't because the government, they had put a lockdown on all of our visas. They needed everyone to stay and fight the war for them. So in the early 1990s, after a daring escape, my parents and brother and I, we all migrated to the US on forged papers, and we asked for political asylum. This meant that we could stay here temporarily while they reviewed our case. So they gave us driver's licenses, work permits, social security cards, things like that. And all of us started working. And fast forward 5 years, and God, our lives, they were so normal that the biggest thing on my mind at the time was, I don't know, how I could get my mom to extend my curfew. And then one day I was working at my first job, and I remember I got this call from my dad, and he told me that I needed to come home immediately because we had this letter from immigration, right? And for those of you who are fortunate enough to not be familiar with the immigration system, they don't send you regular updates like, hey, still thinking about ya. Haven't forgotten about you all. And so on the day of our appointment, we drive about 45 minutes to downtown Los Angeles into this big government building. And inside there is an immigration officer who's waiting for us, and he guided us into this room. And we felt like we were in the wrong place. I mean, the people there were visibly upset. And I remember he told us, just sit and wait until you hear your last name. And our attorney still wasn't there yet, so my dad asked me to find out how long this was going to take. So I got up and I went to this security guard, and I was like, hey, do you know how long this appointment might take? Because my dad has to get back to work. And he told me, oh, your dad will get back to work, just not in this country. And I remember I sat down and I told my dad this. And God, he just lost all the color on his face. And suddenly he was hunched over, he was grabbing his chest, he was visibly in some kind of pain. And at this point, our attorney was really pissing me off. I mean, we didn't even have money for food sometimes. But the one thing we always wanted to make sure we had money for was an attorney, and so for her to not be here right now. So I remember I dialed the office, and this girl picked up the phone, right? And she sounds like she's about, 18 years old, and I'm asking her to just put our attorney on the phone, and she keeps refusing, and I'm telling her, look, this is an emergency, just please put Jody on the phone. I remember I heard Jody's voice, and I was explaining to her that there is something wrong with my dad. God, and they're not letting us get help for him. And she told me to just sit tight, and she's going to see what she can do. After about 45 minutes, this man walked in, and he called our last name. So all four of us got up, and we were following him. We weren't sure where, but we were following him, and he guided us into this room that was so small, and this time our attorney was with us. And I noticed that there was a judge who was sitting there. He was this older gentleman, and he looked really intense. And so this judge, he carries on with our attorney for a while, and then after asking some basic questions, he turns his attention to my dad. And he asks my dad if he has a translator, and my dad says, my daughter will translate for us. And so this judge, he turns his attention to me, and he says, young lady, whatever I say to you, you tell him exactly, nothing more, nothing less. And whatever he tells you, you tell me exactly, nothing more, nothing less. I agree. And so this judge, he starts asking my dad questions, really demeaning questions like, do I understand correctly that you and your family came here on forged papers? And my dad says, well, yes, but the judge cuts him off and says, I don't care about the explanation, I just want to hear yes or no. And this goes on for a while, back and forth, and it is not going well at all. And finally, the judge says, we here in the United States don't give citizenship to people who break the law. We can't, and I won't. And I remember seeing my dad rise out of his seat, and he starts unbuckling his belt, at which point I'm thinking he has completely lost his mind. I'm not sure what he's doing, but he lifts up his shirt on the right side, looks at the judge, and in his native language, he says, "This is what the communists did to me." And he's pointing at a 45-inch knife scar. Then he turns around a little and pushes his pants down and says, "This is what the communists did to me." And he's pointing at 3 gunshot wounds. And then he takes his shoes off. And he takes his socks off, and he says, "This is what the communists did to me." And he's pointing at his toenails, which they had tried to take out with pliers. All those times, years ago, when I didn't know where my dad was, wondering if he cared about me. He was in prison being tortured. And after about 45 minutes, the judge walked in. He starts walking towards my dad. My dad gives his hand to the judge, and the judge puts a stamp in it. And together they stamp our papers. And when they move their hands, it reads, "Asylum granted." It took us 18 years from the day that we got here for me to be granted American citizenship. And it is through my 2 children, my 2-year-old son and my unborn child, that I will make sure that this gratitude that overflows in my heart will continue to live on long after I am gone.